Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, host for this program. Every week, EWTN gives me the privilege of introducing to you men and women who were drawn home to the Catholic Church, sometimes with great enthusiasm, sometimes with reluctance, depending on their background. And I have the pleasure of having a guest tonight that comes from a background that I'm familiar with. Father Fred Werth is a former Presbyterian, so we have a lot in common. Father Fred, welcome to the Journey Home.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And you've told me that you're not necessarily a stranger to the Journey Home.
Oh no, it was you were a big part of the continuing conversion story after I actually entered the church, and in fact, I think at the time we had a different satellite network, but they didn't offer EWTN. And so I had that taken out and another one put in so that just so I could get EWTN, and always found your programs, of course.
Well, we appreciate that.
Great.
I know that the EWTN's mission is to carry the truth out there, and often some think it's primarily to help Catholics understand their faith, which is of course a big part of EWTN, but it's also for reaching those outside the church to understand the truth about the Catholic faith. So I'm glad that EWTN was very able to help you in that journey. So you know what I always do in the Journey Home. I invite you to take a big step back and let the audience know, what kind of spirituality you had when you were brought up.
Well, I was raised as Presbyterian by my mother. My father was a searcher, I suppose, but I would describe him as a probable deist. You know, he had also been raised as a Presbyterian, but had not taken to any. He was opposed to formal religious worship.
What part of the country?
But my mother was a very faithful Presbyterian.
What part of the country you were brought up in?
In Virginia, in the western mountains of Virginia.
Okay.
And it was a cultural thing for my mother.
Okay.
Because the generations back, as far as you wanted to go to the Reformation, were, Protestant and Presbyterian. Yep. And so it's something that was part of her.
In fact, when I think about the Presbyterians of that part of the country, I kind of think of Scotch Presbyterianism, which again is a culture brought with the Scots when they came over and brought it with them. That was as much about being a Scot as from Scotland as it was to be Presbyterian.
Very proud of it.
Yeah.
My family, my mother at least, heralds the Scottish roots, and I try to convince them that it also includes Irish roots. And they say, no, it's Scottish, but I can assure you that it's also Irish, and I have great affinity for the Irish. But yeah, we have ancestors, they can identify the place in Scotland, where they came from.
All right. So you're brought up in the usual hoops as a young Presbyterian?
Yes, you would be paid by a cousin or an uncle or something to learn the children's catechism, that sort of thing. And I benefited from very good Sunday school teachers and some very good ministers.
All right.
So by the time I was a teenager, I was probably moving into the first stages of conversion rather than, rebelling away from it.
Oh, okay.
So,
all right.
So I went to the, youth conferences and all that kind of thing. And every summer when I was a kid, I went to the Presbyterian summer camp,
All right.
But by the time I was 18, 19, I had pretty much drifted away from that and was interested in the Eastern religions and that sort of thing.
I was going to say, sometimes I've heard it described that all the information came in, but nobody opened the door down to the heart.
All the way to the heart.
Yeah. I mean,
the mind was dealing with it fine, which will give you a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Unless you've got the faith to open the eyes of the mind.
All right.
Yeah.
So sometimes actually, I've often said, and Father, you have a church, and I'm sure you have youth, and that sometimes I've said for youth programs, if you're going to try and have a youth program, it better be a good one or don't have one at all, because if it's a bad one, you can inoculate kids from the faith. They get a lot of negatives or information, and then if it doesn't really convert them, then a little later they're going to say, man, I don't want this. It sounds like that's what happened to you a little bit. Would you?
Well, I wasn't turned off by anything. The Presbyterian Church at the time, my mid to later teen years, in fact, we had a wonderful minister. He was a great preacher, very Scottish, had a Scottish brogue. And I was very attracted by him, listened very carefully, to what he said. I was attracted by his faith. But it was just my own inquiry. I'm sort of philosophical by nature and interested in that sort of thing. And I had a lot of questions that I did not seek answers for those questions within the church.
So you said you got interested in the Eastern religions. How'd that start? In high school or in
Yeah.
college?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
By the time I was 14 or 15, I was, becoming interested in Buddhism, particularly Mahayana Buddhism, and then I discovered the Book of Tao, which, as a religion, isn't even practiced. Well, I mean,
Book of
it's
Tao.
practiced, but as it's practiced,
I've heard of that, but I've not.
Taoism is very widespread
Okay.
in China, but it's totally, as practice, is totally different. But the core books, which is the Book of Tao by Lao Tzu, and the interpretations and parables by Chuangzi, his disciple, very small, but great. I mean, great stuff. Very attractive to 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And I became, it was my own. And I don't say undoing, because it was laying a foundation that I did not recognize.
So what was appealing about that for you? Was it, did you feel it was getting more in touch with a God? Or
Not
yourself?
personally. It was a very transcendent thing. By nature, I tend to deal in general principles.
Okay.
And am drawn, I would say, sort of naturally to, metaphysics, and it is very transcendent. So it was an attempt on my part to try to grapple with just the existence and being of God.
Okay.
And in that, it's quite poetic.
Is it? All right.
Okay.
So you were drawn into this? Did you jump into it with both feet? Or was it
Well, as
just
much as you can. It was, there aren't Taoists around.
Oh, yeah, okay, there you go.
So this was an independent, line of study, meditation, if you will. But it did not, it did not keep me in the Presbyterian Church.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. It wasn't it drawing me away, it was myself.
All right.
It was my own exploration.
Well, it's interesting that at least we Catholics, one thing we Catholics believe that not all of our separated brethren believe, and that is that God plants within every individual person that has ever existed a desire for God.
Yes.
And in certain cultures, if they're not evangelized, that doesn't mean that they don't end up with a religion trying to fulfill that desire for God. So we can see parallels. It isn't the complete package, but you can see beginnings and seeds and growth. I mean, as you look back, would you see that in that very time of your life?
Oh, absolutely. Looking back, when we look back, we can see all of these things that God's plan unfolds in your life that you can't see at the time, and maybe for many years after, sometimes maybe never. And this was absolutely foundational for me. I didn't realize. Just as my Presbyterian formal catechesis had been, the scriptures, particularly Old Testament. It was a good thing I got all the foundation in the Old Testament that I did when I was a kid, because I would not have explored them probably on my own until the conversion came about, which was purely miraculous.
So were you rejecting Presbyterianism, or just
No.
moving over? And
Yeah, Presbyterianism, I think I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, most Protestant denominations, but it's not so much a question, I think, in most people's minds of rejecting them. It's they're there, you use them, but you go on. Just like the people who get unhappy in a particular church, they'll leave that church, go start another church. I guess that is, rejecting, but in my case, it was just, I thought, a growing away from that.
Yeah, there's a sense in which maybe, Father, that seems to be the natural tendency of the whole denominational idea anyway. I mean,
Sure.
you're either confronted with the Presbyterians are right, or the Baptists are right, or the Methodists are right, or you say what's really right is getting a relationship with God, and this group will help me, and then maybe this group will help me more, and then maybe this group will help me more. So you're not really rejecting the group because your focus is on trying to get closer to God. And for you at that point, it was outside of the mainstream of what you usually think of in America.
Well, but actually, there were some similarities because, these things really come down to the inner light, and it is individual. It's an individual relationship with God. So in becoming interested in Taoism, I was only moving, I suppose, through the inner light, the grace that God was giving me, the knowledge that He was, giving me to learn more. But I mean, I think that's also part and parcel of all
how God
Protestant
was forming
churches.
Okay.
I mean, it's really based on your own interpretation of Scripture, your own where God is leading you.
Right.
And therefore, it's not bad to split off from this or that. You're only, not abolishing the old covenant, but fulfilling it in their minds.
In that perspective,
And I was doing the same thing, I guess. But
Now, how long did you stay in? Well, first of all, if any of our listeners, would they be able to know that their neighbor is in Taoism, or is there anything distinctive about that practice?
No, and you're not in Taoism, I suppose. As I said, I don't think I don't know how many, 1,000 years or more, or maybe more, it's ever been practiced as religion, because it's really just almost a philosophical system.
Okay.
And
Like
but anybody
Confucianism?
who says, I'm really a Mahayana Buddhist, that doesn't. They're probably not practicing Buddhism as a formal religion in the sense that it would be in India or China. They may be actually in this country because Buddhism has got pretty big.
Sure. But like Confucianism, which is more of a philosophy of ideals.
Right. Well, it became a formal religion, practiced, not separated much from its roots. Taoism, on the other hand, has no connection. As practiced, as religion has no connection with its philosophical roots.
So how long were you involved with that then?
Well, I remained interested in it. By that I mean simply the writings.
Right.
I've remained interested in them all my life. It is not a religion to me. We're talking about works in which I can see layers of truth. Not inconsistent with Catholicism, as a matter of fact, those metaphysical principles.
All right.
But not a practicing. So I was not a practicing anything as far as practiced religion goes from the time I went to college.
Okay.
18.
So when you're in college, it sounds like you're interested in metaphysics. Did you major in philosophy? Was that your draw?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like that's
I
probably
was
your
a
head.
liberal arts major, some English history and philosophy. I took VMI, Virginia Military Institute, was an engineering school, also very good liberal arts, but they didn't have much in the way of philosophy. Sure. They had a philosophy department, but did not offer it as a major. But I took every course that they had in philosophy, and that was a love of mine. And then, of course, I married a cradle Catholic.
Okay.
She was in my high school class, and as soon as I came out of VMI, because you couldn't be married, of course, at VMI, we got married. And
what was your perspective towards the Catholic Church growing up then as a Presbyterian?
they were viewed by my family, though not clearly stated, but impliedly in comments and so forth, that Catholics are they're immigrants. It's a lower class of and the religion is papist, and so they certainly, we didn't have Catholics in my area. Okay. So it wasn't any kind of active persecution, or there weren't enough of them in the area to look down on.
So you really didn't think about it all
So you
that
didn't
much.
think about them. You just really didn't think about them. But if anybody ever brought up the subjects of Catholic, it would be in a somehow pejorative sense or slightly negative.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But my people were very gracious. They would never consciously and explicitly say anything. But it was, it was pretty clear. They weren't happy, I think, that I was, or at least I know my father wasn't happy I was marrying a Catholic.
Wonder. Well, even you, when you first started dating her, was her Catholicism an issue at all for you, or did it make a difference when you first started leaning in her direction?
Yeah, we actually started dating very late in high school and through VMI, which meant very little dating because it was a restrictive environment. But I did not give much thought to it, frankly. Though we had arguments. We're both very strong-willed people, and it was only when I had proposed and we knew we were going to get married, then I had to go meet Father Fahey. And I was difficult, of course. I remember, I can't remember the exact words, but I remember him talking to me, which I did not know at that time how dutiful that was on his part, that, you're going to raise any children Catholic, and I said, well, let's talk about that. This is how difficult that was. I would say, I don't have any objection to the children, becoming Catholic, and I will not stand in the way. But when you ask me, right, as to my fulfillment of positive responsibilities, say, how? And Father Fahey's going, oh my, and finally he said, that'll be fine, Fred, that'll just be fine.
You're dropping all the philosophical categories on him.
A lot of pride.
But at the time, as you were then preparing to marry your wife, you weren't a practicing Presbyterian at the time,
No.
right? You were practicing.
Well, I might take my mother to church if I
Okay.
was home, of course, because my mother's the thing you do. But no, I wouldn't.
All right.
I would stand up, and in the, they profess the Nicene Creed out loud on Sundays, just like the Catholics do, which I didn't know at the time. And of course, they don't know what they mean by it. But
Right.
I would stand there silently, because I was, 22.
Were you making a statement?
I think I was, I was too much pride, and I was maintaining my integrity, like young people do.
Yeah.
They don't.
And you see that a lot. I mean, you don't want to be judgmental of folk, but when you see non-Catholics sometimes visiting a Catholic Mass and don't partake in the physical aspects of the ritual.
Of course. They're afraid.
There's lots of issues there.
A lot of
There's
issues.
no reason why they can't kneel before our God, whether they
course not.
believe in the Eucharist or not. Why not kneel? And I know that because I didn't either before I became a Catholic, as I was visiting Catholic churches. I mean, I don't understand this.
Right.
And
What am I professing if I do make this gesture or say this word?
and by the time you married your wife, you probably had not knelt very often in worship.
Oh no, never. I don't kneel on
Yeah, muscles we hadn't used. So you got married. Was she a practicing Catholic?
Oh, very much. She was a faithful, God bless her. She was a faithful Catholic. Yes, sir. And it was when I don't ever remember it being a question unless it was some special occasion, me darkening the doors of the Catholic Church with her. She probably went to church
alone,
on her own
you just stayed.
until the kids came along.
Okay.
And then, parental responsibility, but I was not good. In the eyes of the world, I was a good father. I thought I was a good father. But there were Sundays when I would be sitting on the back of the horse in the field waving goodbye to Mom and the kids going off to church, the kids screaming, I want to be with Daddy riding a horse, How good is that? That's pretty bad. But normally, I would say, I went to church with them, became drawn by the Mass.
Okay. Is that how the journey
Unconscious.
started? Yeah. Okay.
Totally unconscious, didn't know it. Just looking back, I can tell that the Mass draws you.
Okay. So, how long into your marriage before you started thinking that the Catholic Church was even a blip on the screen for you?
20 years. It was sudden. We were married we were married in 1970, and in 1988, in the summer, going to the little church in North Carolina. We were in Virginia. We lived in Grayson County, Virginia. In the entire county, there is no Catholic church. So we went across the river into it was about a 35-minute drive from my house in the country to Sparta, North Carolina, beautiful little mountain place, and went to St. Francis of Rome Church and met Father Raleigh House. I think it was his first or second Sunday there. And there was nothing different about me when I walked into that church that morning than there had been 10 years before in terms of consideration of the Catholic faith. And within that was September, August, something like that. I mean, no, it was like June, July, August at the latest. And by September, I was in his RCIA, his little tailor-made RCIA program. The next March 25th next, which was the Easter Vigil, I was making the profession of faith.
So what happened?
Father Raleigh was the instrument of the Lord. It was a miracle. I mean, seriously. Everybody I ever knew, anybody who ever knew me, would have bet the farm against me ever becoming Catholic. And I thought there was no rational explanation for it. But shall I tell you?
Yeah, oh yeah, please do, please.
I think it was his first Sunday. I'm not sure, but he hadn't been there long. And Glen Mary priest. And as I walk out of the church, I introduced myself politely to him, getting ready to go on to the car and going about my business. He said, Fred Werth, I've heard about you. I'm supposed to, I need to come to eat at your house. Can I come to dinner? And so I said, Patty Ann. and she had already walked on with the kids, I think. And I said, well, of course, Father, certainly. When would you like to come? He said, well, what about this evening? Father Raleigh's great. And I said, Patty Ann. And she said, oh, tonight? Sure, Father. And he came over that evening, and we went into the front parlor, big old farmhouse in the country, and talked. And I was polite and interested. And Father Raleigh and I talked for, I don't know, 2.5 hours. Patty Ann finally came, that's my wife, I'm sorry, Patty Ann, finally came in and said, if you don't stop this and come to supper now, it's all not going to be worth eating. And that's what stopped us. And we had supper, and he came back, and it was a wide-ranging discussion, because, we're starting out, I'm saying, well, the essential problem, first of all, is God, the existence and, being of God. So he started with somebody.
So it isn't just Catholic, it's...
Oh, no, it's Christian.
Christianity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Christian. No, he was starting from ground zero with me. And he had me every Wednesday night in his RCIA program within a month or two of that, and all the way to the spring when I came into the church. And in that period of time, God opened my heart so that and my mind, the heart, the faith, he put the seed of faith there, opened my heart to it at least, so that I could open my mind enough to be fascinated by what I was learning, fascinated. So it was very intellectual on one level, but it could never have happened except for this miraculous opening of the heart.
Wow. So this was after the morning mass. You had come home for dinner with the priest, and so it wasn't really anything in the mass that morning.
I have no recollection whatsoever.
It was just like all the other ones you'd visited without any intent.
Yep.
But I mean, it really says a couple things. One, that the good Lord had not only put a receptivity in your heart for that, but had put the spark in this priest's desire to say, "I'm going to come home with you." It's almost like Jesus talking to what's his name, Zacchaeus up in the tree. I'm coming home with you tonight.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And it was a wonderful, wonderful trip. But it's so long ago, and everything was so gradual. It's difficult for me now to remember. I didn't record it, keep a diary, anything. So scripture passages, particular events. I remember very well going to the program. And he had, this was before the RCIA program it has just started and hadn't gotten used, use. And so he'd been doing missionary work in the mountains of Virginia and North Carolina all his life as a Glenmary lay missioner, home missioner. And so he had developed his own catechesis that started from ground zero and went up. And for the next 4 years, I went through his RCA course 4 years in a row. First year, it brought me into the church. Then I assisted him with it. We taped it. I had it on VHS tapes. And I think my oldest son may still have those tapes. It was amazing. Great program. It started with creation.
Well, I know you don't remember the specific point-by-point detail that brought you into the church. Did you remember ever having to deal with the differences in your Calvinist Presbyterian background and your Catholic?
The things that struck me first were how much I had missed in my education. Because I'd gone to very good schools. I've been, the Virginia Military Institute was a very good liberal arts school, as well as engineering, and law school at University of Virginia, and which of course not general education. But when I discovered through my own, first 2 months of this RCA course, I'm just listening. By the third month of it, I'm digging on my own. I've got lots of questions, and I'm out there looking at stuff I've never looked at before. And I realized that in this country, in the United States, the education right through college leaves huge holes. Even if you're a history major, what you're going to learn from that occurred in the world from 500 AD to 1000 AD it's practically nothing.
It's called the Dark Ages.
Well, the Dark Ages. Oh my goodness! So, if you take philosophy courses, you certainly will hear about Thomas Aquinas. But are you going to study anything really? No. So, when I realized the void that was missing in my education, I started right then to learn. And so I read the ancient fathers. I remember, you'll like this. Am I talking?
No, that's great. Good.
I remember telling Father, coming in once to the sacristy, I think it was before Mass. Father Raleigh rushed in from his other church. I said, Father, I've got this great work. It's called the Didache. And it's, you knew, he didn't even know. And I was telling him all about the Didache. And he said, Fred, wait a minute, what's this? I said, I'm probably not saying it right. I thought it was from the French, but it's Didach.
Right.
Oh, the Didache. And he's like, that's how little I knew.
Right.
From somewhere in midway in that RCI course on, I gave up reading all fiction. Of course, I'm a practicing lawyer during this time, so I'm very busy. But what time I had for reading was exclusively on the theology of the church, the history of the church, the ancient fathers especially. And so horizons, the world, the universe was opening up. Within 3 years of that, I learned a lot.
Is your wife doing backflips? Is she happy?
My wife was very happy. But, this is probably true of most converts. Within 2 years of my entering the church, she's saying, it's hard to live with a convert. I knew more about, church history and many aspects of formal church theology than my wife did within a year. And she'd been raised from childhood as a Catholic.
Why don't we pause there, Father? And that's a good place to pause, and we'll come back because your journey doesn't stop, right?
Never stops.
That's right. Back this bit. Welcome back to the Journey Home. Our guest tonight is Father Fred Werth, former Presbyterian. You may be following the story so far and wondering, but wait, he's got a wife and she's excited about becoming Catholic, but there he is, a priest. So that's why I said the journey goes on, right, Father? So you've left the story, you've come into the church, a couple years. Your wife is almost saying, shut up a little bit because you're excited about the church, but I'm sure it's inspiring her to appreciate the faith that she'd always had all her life.
Yeah, she and my family, and certainly my daughter, was very young still, very pleased, very pleased. But not as pleased as I was. Nobody could have been as pleased as I was. But yeah, we were, it was, that was March 25th, 1989. The Easter Vigil that year was on March 25th. And I was ordained deacon, transitional deacon, in the seminary on March 25th also.
Oh, okay.
But it was 12 years later that we were fox hunting in Ireland. My wife and I, our whole family, very big in horseback riding. We had horses, and we did that, as a family thing. And we'd gotten into jumping, some years before. And so I had taken her once before to Ireland for a wonderful fox hunting vacation. And we went back the second time in 2001, January 2001. And she came off the horse and sustained massive brain damage. And she died at least 3 times on the ground. We were well out. It wasn't during a fox hunt that it's a long story. Anyway, right. We were out in the hinterlands of Ireland, and she was lying on the ground there, and we were with very good friends, a couple, also fox hunting, and he was a board-certified internal medicine doctor, many years' experience, and he kept telling me, she's gone, Fred. But she didn't die. And finally, she got to hospital in Cork. In Ireland, there were only 2 hospitals that had neurosurgery, Dublin and Cork. And so she hit there about 12 hours later.
I was going to say it's a long drive from those 2 places, wherever you probably were in Ireland.
And so, anyway, multiple craniectomies, and but amazing that she could even survive. But then, of course, she was in a coma from which she couldn't emerge at her age and with the massive amount of brain damage. But she did anyway. And so we got her back to the United States eventually, where they discovered a brain infection. That was the next thing that was going to kill her. And she survived that. And then we got her to rehab. And it's a long story, but 5 months after I got back to my home, for the first time, and she had survived. She had survived, and was conscious, and by that time able to move. And a year and a half later, to make the story very short, that this miraculous gift that God had given us, we were going to celebrate her birthday. She was a great celebrity by that time, and we were going back to Fredericksburg. It's about a 5-hour drive from our house in the mountains to these same friends, celebrate her birthday. And on the way back, she had a great birthday party. Went to Mass. That was on Saturday night. Mass Sunday morning, and after Mass we left. We're driving back to our home in western part of Virginia, and we're hit head on by a truck actually. So I'm doing about 60, he's doing about 60, and he just veered over directly in the car. Later found it was probably a suicide attempt.
Whoa.
But
so it was a choice on his to...
Well, we can't know for sure, but
and
he survived it. But
wow.
So both my wife and daughter were killed instantly, and I was airlifted to the hospital unconscious, but nobody could have come out of the car alive. There was nothing left from the front to the trunk, and yet I came out alive and regained consciousness in a day or two, and was out of that. I had lots of injuries, deflated lungs and all my ribs broken and these kinds of things, but nothing, absolutely nothing permanent. And so that's when I had a period of time to sit and think and
I was wondering how your
ask
faith,
God
how your
what am I
faith
supposed to
did
do?
through all that period of time. I mean, that's
That and that alone is what sustained me. It was amazing. And not only that, I did not go through the normal grieving period. That was God's work. He had something for me to do, which I had not the foggiest idea. But looking back on it, it's plain as the nose on your face. And so I couldn't do anything physically for a month and a half, 2 months. And to make a long story short, I am sitting at my mother's, never went back to my family home, sitting at my mother's, and where my wife and children lived, and praying, reading, trying to ask God what it was I'm supposed to do now. My reason for existence is over. I still have children. I have some grandchildren. But see, now my children, except for Sally, who was 23 when she died in that car accident, the others are grown and gone.
okay.
And
So now you're alone then?
so I figured there must be something. There's no reason I'm left alive. Right? I couldn't have come out of the wreck. I'm left alive for a purpose. I better find out what it is. And I was quite serious about that. And so I made the resolve to go to a retreat. Never been on a retreat in my life. Never done Lectio Divina in my life. I called up, of course, Father Raleigh, and also my pastor, Father Mark Lawler at that time. Wonderful, wonderful man. And said, yes, go on a retreat. Father Raleigh said, go to a Trappist retreat. I said, yes, sir. I'm going to can't get into the Trappist retreat. So I just went on the internet and I found St. Meinrad's Archabbey in Indiana.
Yes, right.
They'll take me. I call them up. They'll take me anytime. I said, I may need to be there for a while. I don't know if it's going to be 3 days, a month, how long. He said, you come for as long as you want. So in January, I was going to go the day after Christmas. My uncle died. I had to be with my mother then. I actually ended up going, got there, I think it was on the 3rd of January. So Patty Ann had died September. Patty Ann and Sally died September 22nd, 2002. January 3, 2003, I'm sitting in a monastery, and then it would take way too long. It'd take a couple of programs, tell you about the series of miracles that occurred. But
We ought to hear at least one of them, though.
well, it began, I guess,
Maybe
with,
because you began with not thinking priesthood, right?
oh no. I guess if I was trying very hard, I really was trying very hard to be totally open. I don't care what it is. You just show me, Lord, right? But we all have our agendas. And through total ignorance, because I knew nothing of the religious life, really, I thought, I must be called to be a monk, to be religious, right? I could be a doorkeeper, porter in a monastery. But it wasn't really a desire. It's just a thought.
Sure.
Maybe this is what he's calling me to do. Because I would have thought at that time that I might go into the contemplative life, that God might call me there. I now know that would have been a total disaster. And the Lord knows that, But so I went there, and I, as I said, I can't tell it all, but the wonderful monk there, he was had one eye, and his name was Amato Bennett. These are Benedictines, and never been there in my life, of course. And I told him just that I wanted to discern God's will. I told him I'd lost my wife and daughter, and I was here to look for whatever God wanted me to do. And he said, have you ever used Lectio Divina? And I said, no, I've heard of it, but I've never used it. So he said, here's what we do. I give you 4 readings, gave me the short course. And I'll meet with you again tomorrow at such and so. So in my typical fashion, I take that bull by the horns. And, I constructed like 4 homilies. Well, I didn't know that at the time, but I'm constructing exegesis of homilies out of these things, or I'm just working furiously intellectually. And in that process, that first night from, say, 3 in the afternoon till after midnight, while I'm poring over, and I'm not saying I did not also pray, but essentially it was still an intellectual exercise. I learned what Lectio Divina was. So by the next night, next afternoon, I was settling in and knew what I was doing. And I could link all of the scriptures I was given and the messages I received. But finally, I think it was about the third night I was there. And I keep saying night. I was doing this during the day. I was going to Mass. I was walking around the campus, and I was praying. But I was also working on this at night. And in the late afternoon, on about this third day, I think it was the third reading of that day, I was meditating on Psalm 121. Yes. Now, you have to know that at St. Meinrad's, there is this, which is a beautiful archabbey, but over on a hill not far away is a beautiful little chapel of Our Lady of Monte Cassino. And it's tiny, and all its walls and ceiling are titles and depictions of Our Lady. Like Tower of Ivory, Help of Christians, It's absolutely gorgeous. And in the front of it, there's this crucifix outside, directly in line with the front door. I think of it as life-size, but it's actually not quite. Well, I had been there, at least by the second day, and I had prayed in that little chapel. And so on the third day, in the late afternoon, I'm just, I don't know that I was praying or anything at that moment, but I had been meditating on it. I've been reading Psalm 121, and I hear a voice. I have to say interlocution because it was like physical. I mean, it was like audibly, physically hearing the voice. But anyway, I'm just sitting there dead quiet, and I hear, "Run to Mary." And it was so clear and natural that I actually looked around to see who had, nobody could have come in my little room. Nobody was there. And I just said, okay. I just went, but now I went back to reading the psalm again, So my mind is actually engaged. Now I'm not just sort of drifting. And I hear louder and insistently, "Run to Mary." And I knew I had to get up and move, not figuratively run to Mary. And I said, what am I doing? I'll go to the chapel. I'll go to Our Lady's chapel. And the psalm, I lift up my eyes to the mountain, and this chapel's on top of this little, what they call a mountain. Right. I said, that's where I will go. I will lift up my eyes. I got in my car, because it was a mile away maybe. I drove by the chapel, pulled directly in front of it. Nobody's there. This is a cold, windy January day. And I look out where I parked. I just parked conveniently in front of it. And I look out the window before I even get out of the car. And I see that crucifix directly in front of the front door of the chapel. This crucifix. And all I can tell you is that at that moment, I knew I was supposed to become a priest. Now, that doesn't make any sense. I'm 55 years old. None of that even entered my mind. I knew. And I got out of the car. I walked to directly in front of that crucifix. And I lay down with my arms outstretched in form of a cross, directly with my face on the ground in front of that crucifix. I said, here I am. Okay, if this is it, here I am, Lord. I know it doesn't make any rational sense, but I tell you it was very real. And I knew from that moment on, without question, that I was supposed to go, that I was supposed to take whatever steps were necessary to become a priest. I didn't know I would become a priest. I just knew that's the path I'm to follow.
Well, that's what we believe God does communicate that way to us. A part of us wants to doubt that in our lives, but that's what we do believe that God does do. And it's really that was a message for you.
For me.
That was the point. It was a message for you, not for us and not for...
Just as personal as
right.
It should be.
Exactly. But it was a bit of a surprise for you, right? To consider the priesthood.
Oh, Yeah, I had not considered that, of course, and I was too old for one thing. I mean, what would the Lord do with a 55-year-old lawyer, you know? But when that happens, when God does grant you that particular miraculous grace for His purposes, there ain't any question about it. You don't even ask yourself questions at that time. It was days later before I would ask myself, how am I going to follow this path? It's not going to be possible.
Because the Lord continued to confirm that day after
my
day in
goodness.
the midst of the.
Oh my
So these are
goodness.
the other miracles and other things which you don't want to.
Every barrier melted away. Yeah. I called Father Raleigh that evening. I was so excited that evening. I tried to go back actually dutifully to finish the fourth reading of my Lectio Divina. I was so excited. I couldn't. And I called Father Raleigh that night and said, Father, you're not going to believe this, but just listen to me. I'm here at this retreat, and I found out, now listen, I found out that I'm supposed to become a priest, And I knew he was going to say, that's nice, Fred, but And there was this long pause, and Father Raleigh said, I almost cry when I say this, he says, oh, Fred, that's what I've been praying for. And I thought, how's that possible? And I came back. I remember asking Father Raleigh, well, if I'm supposed to be a priest, am I supposed to be a Glen Mary priest? That's what I've known. That's all I've known. He said, no, I'm not supposed to be a Glen Mary priest, Fred. You go see Father Mark, my pastor. I went to see Father Mark. I'm 55 years old. My wife and daughter just died months ago. There's no way, right? And he said, can you go down to Charlotte? I said, sure, whenever you say. I go wherever you want, whenever. And he took me down to the vocational director within a week or so. I had met that guy, Father John Allen, a wonderful fellow. I hadn't met him for the first time. And half hour into the discussion, he says, excuse me, and gets up and goes in, comes back from using the phone and says, I want you to go up to, will you go wherever I want you to go to see things? And I said, sure, whatever you say. So I want you to go to Boston. I want you to look at this seminary.
That's the seminary for second career?
Yeah, Pope John the 23rd, right. National Seminary.
Yeah.
National Seminary for diocesan, canons regular, and diocesan priests. Amazing. And when I arrived there, the average entering age was my age, was about 55. Filled with stories. This place is filled with stories. But
sure.
Yeah, and I had a law practice to shut down, a house to get rid of. I got rid of everything. We had a lot of things going on, and of course we had a lot of things going on, and it was all accomplished. End of August, I was sitting in a chair in the classroom in seminary. Not possible.
And then what, 3 years? 3 years of seminary, was it? 3 years?
4.
4 years of seminary?
4 years, major theology, yeah. These guys, they've all been in the world for 30 years. Most of them had college degrees and many advanced degrees.
But that in itself sounds fascinating. To have gone through 4 years with all these men with all these different backgrounds.
It was
coming
amazing.
into late.
Yeah, we had everything. I had a full bull colonel in the Marine Corps, retired, and a senior Navy chief, retired. We had retired diplomats, doctors, salesmen, everything. It was incredible.
So how long now have you been a priest?
4 years.
4 years.
I've just completed 4 years. I spent first year as parochial vicar at a beautiful, wonderful, what we consider a large church, probably 6,000 families.
Wow.
And then I was sent to the mountains to these 2 little churches as pastor. So I got 2 little churches now with sort of 4 communities in it, because we have Hispanic and English in each.
In both churches, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We have an email here, which is a nice email, given the journey you've been through. It comes from Gabe from Nashville. As a young person in my 20s, I'm having a hard time figuring out God's will for my life. Are there any suggestions Father would give me so I can better know where God is leading me?
First thing, particularly at any age, really, but considering myself at least in my 20s, to be really open, because we think we're being open when we deign to listen or we deign to read something. But we carry all of our prejudices and all our suppositions still with us. And whether you're a Catholic or not a Catholic, if you will open yourself up to be truly open to what you may learn, and you study the Catholic Church, the history, the theology, particularly if you can. And I think, of course, this way I started with from the earliest church, from the apostolic and post-apostolic, sub-apostolic fathers. It's an inevitable path once you're on it.
One of my favorite scriptures is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And I'm wondering if you agree that this is true. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He'll direct your paths.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, if we're going to trust in ourselves.
But He does guide us. We
He
just
will.
got to be open. We've got to
believe. Just believe that.
Yeah, yeah.
To believe that, you've really got to believe that there's a personal God. You've got to believe that God not only exists, but is not a purely transcendental entity, but has an interest, which as humans we can only describe as a personal interest in you.
Yeah. These other Eastern religions were getting close to the transcendental aspect, but not the personal reality,
Right.
the intimacy, a God that would love us so much that He'd die for us. You know, that
Become
come one of us.
Amen.
Yeah, the power of that. We got an email from Debbie from Savannah. What advice would Father give to a couple contemplating marriage, but one is a devout Christian and the other doesn't practice any religion at all?
Well, I was in that boat myself. And I look back and marvel at the patience and the prayer, the goodness of the people that were making up for my defects. Do not expect to convert. We don't make people reach the end that God has for them. You make sure that your intended spouse is truly not opposed, because I think that is a very difficult situation where the future spouse is actually opposed to the religion of the other spouse.
If you go into
that's not probably the case for someone who has no affiliation of their own, and just pray for them to to be open and let them always see your faith in action. Who knows what influence it did for me. I'd have my wife as an example for 20
Well, I was thinking
years.
about that. You had mentioned that after you had had this awakening at the monastery, then you found out later that that's exactly what your priest was praying for you.
Yeah.
And you didn't mention it, but it may have been that your wife had been praying all those years that you would be open to the Catholic faith.
I know she was. I mean, she never told me, but I know she
Right,
was.
right.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of even this,
That's what you can do.
This question here, we never want to give up praying for our spouse and
Never.
for their spiritual journey and how God might open that up. Father, couple seconds to close. Could you close us with a blessing?
Certainly. May Almighty God fill your hearts with His love, your minds with the light of His truth. May He preserve you in His love, protect you in His truth, and may He make you and keep you always as His good servants, now and in eternity. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.